This short fanfiction imagines what might have taken place in the quiet aftermath of a scene from the 1995 Pride and Prejudice adaptation, when Darcy confronts Wickham in his private chambers at university. The hour was not yet late, though the sun had begun its slow descent behind the stone walls of the college, casting long shadows across the cloister. It was the sort of golden light that flattered everything it touched, except, perhaps, the conscience. Darcy had not intended to seek Wickham at that moment, but bearing a letter from his father, and hearing from a passing fellow that Wickham had returned from town, he turned towards his rooms without hesitation. The door was closed, but that in itself did not trouble Darcy. Wickham was not a man given to industry, and it was rare for his quarters to be anything but occupied by idleness and the clink of discarded glass. With the letter in hand and his patience already worn thin by weeks of negligent conduct, Darcy opened the door. His countenance was unreadable. The sight that greeted him was not wholly unexpected, yet it was sufficient to still him at the threshold. A girl, startled, beshevelled, and young, gasped and leapt to her feet, one hand clutching at the front of her bodice, while the other swept garments and ribbon into her arms. Her expression was a portrait of alarm, not for what she had done, but for who had seen it. Without a word, without daring to look him in the eye, she fled past him in a blur of steps and shame, the scent of rose water trailing faintly behind her. Darcy stepped inside and closed the door behind him. His manner was composed, but there was no mistaking the steel behind it. Wickham did not rise. "Good afternoon," he said, with the practised ease of a man who has never once been caught off guard. "Had I known you were calling, I might have arranged less dramatic company." Darcy's gaze moved slowly about the room before settling on him. "You are fortunate the corridors are not better trafficked at this hour." Wickham grinned. "Fortune seems to favour me more often than not. You take too much for granted." "On the contrary," Wickham replied, folding his arms behind his head, "I take exactly what's offered." "She was a servant," Darcy said. Wickham shrugged, rising at last to fill his glass. "It would appear so. You endangered her livelihood." "I entertained her," Wickham replied, lifting the glass to his lips. "A kindness, you might say." Wickham gave a soft laugh. "And thus beneath your concern." Darcy stepped into the room, his tone cool and measured. His gaze followed the space where the girl had vanished, then returned, cold and steady. "You call it kindness, to take advantage of a woman whose position leaves her no liberty to refuse. What do you suppose becomes of her now that her absence from duty has been observed, or will be before the hour ends?" Wickham offered a languid smile. "A scolding, a warning at most, unless of course you mean to make a report of your own." "You misunderstand me," Darcy said, his voice low. "It is not my intention to betray her, but to warn you. If she is cast out, it will not be her disgrace alone, it will be yours as well, and far less easily dismissed." There was a beat of silence before Wickham spoke again, softer this time, though not repentant. "You take this too seriously." "I take seriously any man who believes himself entitled to another's ruin." He turned sharply, gaze fixed. "And not beneath my concern, but beneath yours, if you had any sense of honour." That struck a nerve. Wickham's smile flickered, then returned with practised ease. "You think me base for accepting what she gave freely." "I think you careless. You endanger not only your own reputation, which is threadbare enough, but hers. If discovered, she will be dismissed without reference, her livelihood, her safety gone, all for your afternoon amusement." Wickham stood up now, his tone more clipped. "I have not your fortune, Fitzwilliam, nor your principles. You stand comfortably in judgment, but do not pretend you have known want. I do not make victims of women who have no defence." There was silence for a moment. Darcy continued more quietly. My father has given you everything a gentleman might require: education, freedom, trust. You pay him with secrets and scandal. You speak as though I owe him a debt for my very existence. You owe him decency." Wickham rose then, the familiar mask of charm now thin over something colder. "And if I fail your standard, what then? Will you report me, withdraw your father's favour?" Darcy moved to the hearth, where the lady's ribbon had been discarded and forgotten. He picked it up, studied it for a moment, and then laid it carefully on the mantel. "No, I shall merely wait. A man such as you needs no enemy to undo him. You will see to your own ruin in time." He turned to leave, but paused at the threshold. "I hope for the girl's sake that you are at least discreet. You may find the world less forgiving than you imagine." Wickham's eyes narrowed. "You make it sound as though you intend to watch my every step." "I do not," Darcy replied calmly. "You leave footprints deep enough for anyone to follow." And with that he took his leave. The door closed behind him with quiet finality. Wickham stood alone in the room, listening to the echo of Darcy's footsteps, which seemed to linger long after he had gone, as did the scent of rose water that clung to the room, fragile and out of place. Darcy descended the stairs and passed again beneath the shadowed arches of the cloister. He said nothing aloud, yet a thought sat heavy upon his mind, unshaken. He is the architect of his own ruin. The scaffolding, I fear, will not hold much longer.